Why do nightmares always start with something beautiful? The sun was just beginning to rise when I first rolled up to the lake ranch gates. I remember thinking how peaceful it looked. Golden light hitting the rooftops, dew clinging to pristine, lawns, the kind of place you'd expect laughter echoing down cul-de-sacs and kids riding bikes until dusk. But paradise has its devils. Mine was waiting with a folder in one hand and a threat in the other. You're required to meet me at the HOA office immediately, or I'll have you forcibly removed. With guns. Those were the first words Brenda Hawthorne ever said to me. Not hello, not welcome. Just a scream, a warning, and eyes wide with rage. She looked like someone holding court, gripping those documents like they were royal decrees. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled tight against her, skull making her face seem sharper than it already was. Behind her, filming everything with an air of smug assurance, was her sister Cindy. If Brenda was the queen, Cindy was her personal PR machine. What they didn't know, what no one at Lake Ranch knew, was that I'd just been sworn in as the town's new police chief. A detail Brenda would soon regret overlooking. But that morning, as I stepped out of my car and looked into Brenda's eyes, I realized she saw me not as a man, not as a neighbor, but as an obstacle. And obstacles were things she bulldozed. All this because I planted sunflowers. 8 golden giants, swaying gently in the breeze, reaching proudly toward the sun in my backyard. A quiet tribute to my childhood, my mother, and the calm I'd desperately sought after 15 years on the force in a city that bled crime and corruption. Those monstrosities exceed our maximum height regulation of 6 feet and are creating an eyesore that affects every property value in this neighborhood. Brenda's voice sliced through the morning like a paper cut. Dramatic, unwarranted, memorized. You could tell this wasn't her first performance. I looked at her, then at my sunflowers, and back again. The flowers didn't scream rebellion. They whispered peace. But I'd been a detective long enough to know when someone was using rules to mass control, and when their eyes were hiding something bigger than height restrictions. "Ma'am," I said calmly, "I read the HOA documents. I don't recall seeing anything about backyard planting height limits. Can you show me where it says that?" That's when I saw it. The first crack. Her face flushed, her grip tightened on that folder, and her sister stopped filming for just a heartbeat. The performance was slipping. Brenda recovered fast, puffed her chest, and spat more bureaucratic fire. As HOA president, I can enforce these regulations through whatever means necessary, but even Cindy couldn't keep pretending now. She glanced sideways, muttered something under her breath, something about the old president, before snapping her mouth shut at Brenda's glare. Something about that made my instincts twitch. The tension between them, the secrecy. This wasn't about flowers. That's also when I noticed the street lamps. Tiny LED bulbs blinking in odd patterns. Too frequent, too deliberate. They weren't there to light roads. They were watching, filming, listening. No regular HOA installs covert surveillance. I should have walked away. Should have smiled and told Brenda I'd trim the flowers. But I was never good at ignoring the itch when something didn't feel right. "I'll review the documents tonight," I said, keeping my voice even. "And I'll let you know if I find your regulation." Brenda's face twisted. I'd just denied her a throne she thought already hers. She stepped closer, breathing hard. "You seem to be under the mistaken impression this is a negotiation." I didn't blink. That was when Cindy cracked again. "Sis, But the old president never... The sentence never finished. Brenda silenced, her with a single glance, sharp enough to slit skin. But I'd heard enough. The old president, surveillance lights, panic behind practiced smiles, and the way Cindy quickly angled her camera away when she noticed me staring at those lights. This wasn't a flower dispute. It was a stage, a show, and I was their newest target. I turned and walked into my house without another word. Through the window, I saw Brenda pacing, phone to her ear, pointing furiously between my sunflowers and her perfect rose garden, as if one had insulted the other. There was something too perfect about that rose garden. Symmetrical, vibrant, like the eye. Petals themselves had been trained into submission. People who crave power over others usually keep their own lives tightly pruned. And the more I stared at those roses, the more I wondered what secrets they were hiding beneath the soil. Then, the sirens. 2 squad cars came screaming through Lake Ranch's quiet streets like a SWAT raid on a meth lab. Lights flashing, doors swinging open. Brenda watched from her porch with a triumphant smirk as officers Jake Miller and Sarah Chen approached my door. Miller was young, all nerves and protocol. Chen... I recognized the stance. Veteran. Watchful. Dangerous. They knocked. Sir, we received a report of threats made against a community official. Possible weapons on premises. Brenda had escalated. Fabricated. Lied. I knew what she was trying to do. Paint me as a violent, non-compliant resident. Scare me. Intimidate me. But she had no idea who she was playing with. I'm happy to cooperate, I told Miller, watching him glance nervously at his partner. But before we go further, here's my ID. I handed him my badge. Lake Ranch Police Chief, issued 1 week ago. The color drained from his face like blood down a drain. Chen's jaw dropped just slightly before her eyes narrowed in recognition. Marcus? Stone, she breathed. You trained me at Metro PD. It hit her then, and fast. She stepped forward, placing a steady hand on Miller's shoulder. Behind them, Brenda's confident stance crumbled like a kicked sandcastle. Her face contorted in disbelief, then horror, as she realized she hadn't just picked the wrong target, she'd tried to frame her new police chief. I stepped past the officers. Officers, I said, loud enough for Brenda to hear. I believe Mrs. Hawthorne may have filed a false report. That's still a felony, isn't it? Brenda started backing up, slowly retreating toward her door. Her voice, once fire, was now smoke. Perhaps I misunderstood. Mr. Stone was uncooperative. I may have overreacted, but her sister's voice, the one she hadn't silenced fast enough, cut the air like a dagger. We can't let him stay, sis. What if he starts asking questions about... She froze, realizing we were listening. Brenda turned pale. I stepped forward slowly, feeling the power shift completely in my hands. Her kingdom of control, already showing cracks, was starting to shatter. Mrs. Hawthorne, I said, locking eyes with her, would you like to explain what exactly your sister doesn't want me discovering? The wind picked up. My sunflowers rustled behind me, tall and golden, refusing to bow. And Brenda finally looked scared. She never expected me to dig deeper. That was her first mistake. The second was underestimating what 15 years of detective work does to a man. You don't just walk away from years of solving homicides, reading micro-expressions, and recognizing rehearsed lies from real fear. The moment Brenda flinched, Not from me, but from her own sister's mouth. I knew I wasn't dealing with a power-hungry HOA president anymore. I was looking at someone hiding something dangerous. And now? She knew I was looking. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those blinking LED street lamps, tiny mechanical eyes blinking with secrets. I'd lived in enough neighborhoods to know what street lights should look like. These weren't government-installed. They were private, custom, and they weren't there for security. They were there to watch. Morning came, cold and silent. The only sound was the birds and the faint hum of electronics buzzing from every corner pole and mailbox post. Brenda didn't just want control. She'd created a surveillance grid in a neighborhood that thought it was peaceful. And now, for the first time, someone was watching back. I started canvassing the area like I was building a case file. Each lamp post, each corner. I wasn't wearing my badge or my uniform, just a hoodie, jeans, and an old ball cap. The less I looked like the chief, the more likely they'd let their guard down. And that's when I met her, Dorothy Kellerman. 73 years old, sharp as a scalpel, and guarded by 12 cats that followed her like she was a general in charge of the world's furriest army. She lived 3 houses down from Brenda in a storybook cottage that smelled like coffee and lavender. When I knocked on her door, she didn't flinch. In fact, she smiled. "I wondered how long it would take you," she said before I could even speak. "Excuse me?" I asked. "You're the new chief, right? Marcus Stone? Come in. We've been waiting for someone like you." She wasn't, talking about the cats. Her living room looked like the kind of place time forgot. Shelves of antique books, lace doilies on every armrest, and 3 separate teapots depending on the mood. But the far wall told a different story. Photo albums, file folders, maps of Lake Ranch with markings in red pen. Dorothy hadn't just been living here, she'd been documenting everything. "You were friends with Richard Peaton?" I asked, scanning the name scribbled across several folders. "Friends," she said softly. "He was the love of my life." She paused, then added, "And Brenda killed him." The words hit like a cold slap. I didn't need to say anything. She'd already decided I could be trusted. She reached under the coffee table and pulled out a manila envelope. "He left me this the night before he disappeared." Inside were 2 things. A series of grainy photographs taken from inside Dorothy's home, all clearly shot through her windows without her knowledge, and a cassette tape labeled in careful handwriting. Insurance. I hadn't seen a cassette in years, but I knew what it meant. Evidence. Richard Peaton knew he was in danger, and this tape was his last act of protection. We found an old boombox in her attic. As the tape hissed to life, his voice filled the room, low and urgent, the voice of a man who knew his time was short. "If you're hearing this, Dorothy, then something has happened to me. Brenda Hawthorne is not who she says she is." The room felt colder as the tape played on. Richard recounted everything, how he discovered that Brenda had been forging HOA regulations, pocketing thousands in illegal fees, how she was surveilling residents through cameras disguised as infrastructure. But that wasn't the worst of it. He believed she had killed before, multiple times. "She told me once that rose gardens are good for hiding things," his voice said through the static. "Told me bone meal makes flowers bloom faster." I thought she was joking. I didn't laugh. Dorothy sat perfectly still, tears sliding silently down her face. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. "She planted the roses right after Richard vanished," she whispered. all in one night. Contractors came and left before sunrise. Said, it was stress relief. That wasn't landscaping. That was a burial. I need to show you something else, she said, leading me to the basement. It was a tight, musty space, walls lined with boxes and more photo albums. She pulled out a binder labeled Lake Ranch HOA, pre-Brenda. Inside were financial records, photocopies, handwritten notes, side-by-side comparisons of official HOA statements with forged ones she suspected Brenda had filed. Brenda hadn't. Just taken over a neighborhood. She'd taken over its books, its laws, its people. $47,000 missing. Fake fees. Phantom projects. Legal expenses with no invoices. And a pattern of targeting residents who asked questions. Like Richard. Like Dorothy. Like me. She knew you'd be trouble, Dorothy said. The moment you planted those sunflowers. It wasn't about the flowers. It was about you doing something she couldn't control. I felt sick. The roses, the cameras, the power grabs. Brenda had been ruling Lake Ranch like a kingdom, and anyone who threatened her reign disappeared. She used to work at a funeral home, Dorothy added. Morrison Funeral Home, 10 years, knew all the chemicals, formaldehyde, potassium chloride. Richard told me before he vanished. He'd smelled something strange near her garden. Something wrong. I knew what that meant. He'd smelled death. Before I could ask more, a sound buzzed from Dorothy's end table. A phone alert. She picked it up, her hand trembling. A photo had just arrived. It was Dorothy, taken seconds earlier, from outside her own window. She's watching us, Dorothy whispered. Right now. I stood fast, checked every window, scanned every line of sight. Nothing obvious. But I knew better. Brenda had wired this neighborhood with enough tech to make a government contractor blush. And now she knew Dorothy was talking. I told her to pack a bag. Police protection wasn't optional anymore. Back at the station, I reviewed the tape 5 more times. I called in favors, deep ones. I needed someone who could chase ghosts, so I called Jake Morrison, private investigator, ex-cop, and the brother of Mayor Davidson, one of Brenda's former boyfriends who vanished years ago without a trace. When I told him Brenda's name, the silence on the line lasted too long. You said Hawthorne? He asked finally. That name means something to you? It does now. He was in Lake Ranch by morning. By noon, we had a plan. While I looped in, Sarah Chen to secure the perimeter, Jake followed his own lead, a storage garage complex 15 miles outside town. A place no one would think to look. An hour later, he called me. I found it, he said. Davidson's car. Same plates. Same VIN. But Marcus, it's been cleaned. Like, detailed? No, he said grimly. Sterilized. I arrived just as the CSI team pulled in. Unit 47B. Registered under a fake name that led back to Morrison Funeral Home. Inside sat a 2019 Toyota Camry under a tarp. Cleaning supplies stacked to the side. Bleach, hydrogen peroxide, luminol. We sprayed. We waited. And then, the light hit. The backseat lit up blue. Blood everywhere, not just stains, spatter, pools, cast-off arterial spray. Someone had died here, violently, and beneath the spare tire, we found his college ring, his watch, and a USB drive containing council footage, a video of Brenda Hawthorne having coffee with Davidson just hours before he vanished. I turned to Jake. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. This wasn't just a pattern anymore. It was a system. She'd done this before. She was doing it now. And if we didn't stop her, she'd do it again. That night, I stood on my porch staring out at Brenda's house. No lights. On. No movement. But I could feel her watching me, just like those cameras watched Dorothy. And I wondered, how many other rose gardens had she planted? And how many more secrets were buried beneath the soil? Do you know the feeling when your entire world tilts slightly? Just enough that everything familiar suddenly looks wrong? That's what I felt the moment I stepped into Brenda's backyard the next morning. Sarah Chen was already waiting. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were scanning. Not like a rookie, like a soldier. She was out here at 4 a.m., Sarah said, digging. She pointed to the base of the rose bushes. Brenda's prized garden, perfectly symmetrical, blooming like some cursed fairy tale. The soil was soft, disturbed, and freshly watered, though there hadn't been a drop of rain all week. She's panicking, I muttered. No, Sarah replied. She's erasing. That's when we heard the knock on Dorothy's front door. Cindy Hawthorne. Her eyeliner smudged, hair unbrushed, breath trembling like a leaf in the wind. She looked around, like a rabbit sniffing for a hawk, and when I opened the door, she burst into tears. I didn't know, she kept saying. I didn't want to know. I let her inside. Dorothy handed her a cup of tea, but Cindy was beyond comfort. Her voice cracked with every word. I found something, she said finally. In the basement, behind the furnace. There's a kind of silence that only comes before something monstrous is revealed. Cindy pulled out her phone and handed it to me. The screen showed photos. Dark, grainy, taken in a rush. But even then, the truth screamed. Dozens of photographs. All of men labeled, tagged, filed a shrine. Some smiling, some sleeping, some clearly taken without consent. And beneath them, items, personal things, wallets, watches, toothbrushes, trophies. There was more. Handwritten files, timelines, relationship dates, notations like final dose, administered and effectiveness of potassium, 14 minutes. She wasn't just killing, she was studying. One photo hit harder than the rest. A blurry snapshot of me watering my sunflowers. Dated 2 weeks ago, labeled, Marcus Stone, monitoring begins. My stomach clenched. She's planning something, I said. Not just hiding. She's preparing. That's when Cindy's phone buzzed. One new text. From Brenda. Where? Are you? Come home now, or there will be consequences. Attached was a photo. Cindy, standing at Dorothy's door. Taken moments earlier. It wasn't just surveillance, it was live. Brenda was watching us in real time. She knows you flipped, I whispered. And she's not going to let that slide. Cindy's face turned to sheer panic. She has more files, tapes, things I didn't take pictures of. She calls it her manual, like a step-by-step guide to solving problems. Sarah's voice dropped low and cold. A killer's playbook. We moved fast. Jake Morrison met us back at Brenda's house, warrant in hand, while Sarah and I cleared the perimeter. Cindy unlocked the front door, her hands shaking. The air inside was stale and floral, like fake comfort masking rot. Down. In the basement, we found the hidden door, a thin panel behind a bookshelf. Pressed just right, it clicked open. The smell hit first, not rot, not death, but sterile cold chemicals, like a funeral home. Inside was a room that didn't belong. In a house. steel filing cabinets, multiple monitors, infrared cameras, audio devices, a desk with red-labeled folders arranged by location, Lake Ranch, Pine Valley, Riverside County, every town she'd lived in, every man she'd hunted, and there it was, her handwritten manual, Relationship. Solutions. A practical guide to permanent problem resolution. It was categorized. Titled, Indexed. Chapter 1. Identifying the weak points. Chapter 5. Elimination and disposal. Chapter 9. Post-cleanup surveillance. Each section read like a guidebook. Cold, efficient, inhuman. She franchised it, Jake muttered. She turned murder into a brand. Sarah found a drawer labeled Backups. Inside, passports, IDs, bank statements, all under different names. One had a Costa Rica address, another, Ontario. Each had a matching disguise photo. Wigs, different hair colors, prosthetic noses. She was prepared to vanish. She was going to run, I said. She knew we were closing in. That's when Sarah found something that changed everything. Buried beneath the documents was a sealed folder with one name, Sarah Chen. Inside, a birth certificate, adoption papers, and a photo of a younger man, Richard Peaton. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out. "That's my father," she whispered. She dropped to the floor. I knelt beside her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "He never told..." "You?" She shook her head. "I didn't even know I was adopted, not officially. He was looking for me?" Dorothy stood behind us, her voice breaking. "He found you, Sarah. He requested to transfer here when he learned you were stationed nearby. He wanted to get close, without disrupting your life." Sarah's tears were quiet but endless. Years of lost time crashing down in a single moment. And then we saw it. Brenda's journal, open to a recent page. "She knows I'm his daughter," Sarah whispered, reading aloud. "She calls me the last loose end. Says she has to make it look like an accident." She wiped her tears and stood. "Let's finish this." That night, we prepped arrest warrants. Jake worked the phones with the FBI. We had evidence, enough to bury her in prison until the end of time. But Brenda had already moved. At 4:12 a.m., Sarah called out from her cruiser radio. "She's loading bags into her car. Looks like she's ditching evidence." We raced to intercept, but when we arrived, she was gone. Only Cindy remained, standing barefoot in the yard, sobbing, pointing to the fire pit where Brenda had burned most of her files. All that remained were ashes, and the chilling final words Brenda left behind. "If anyone comes looking for me, they'll never find the others." That morning, I stood in Brenda's backyard staring at the rose garden, and I realized something awful. She'd said it before. Bone meal makes flowers grow. Dorothy arrived with fresh coffee and an old notebook Richard had given her, a hand-drawn map marked with an X directly beneath the biggest rose bush. We called in K9, and when the cadaver dogs arrived, they went wild. Multiple hit sites, all in the garden. The excavator arrived an hour later. By noon, we'd found the first body, and then the second and the third, each one carefully embalmed, preserved, dressed, not hastily buried, but placed. Like trophies, one was Richard Peaton, another was Davidson, and the third, confirmed by dental records later that day, was William Brooks, the Pine Valley councilman Brenda once dated, the one who supposedly died of a heart attack at 35. Brenda hadn't just killed, She'd curated. The garden was her mausoleum, and now the whole country was about to find out who Brenda Hawthorne really was. 3 hours. That's how long it took before the story hit the national wires. By then, we'd unearthed the bodies of 3 men in Brenda's backyard, all preserved like grim tributes in a floral tomb. But everyone at Lake Ranch, everyone, watching their televisions, everyone listening to their radios, they wanted to know just one thing. Where was she? Brenda Hawthorne. Respected HOA president, community leader, charity donor, was now the subject of a nationwide manhunt, and she was vanishing faster than any of us could follow. The moment we realized she'd fled, I sent Cindy into protective custody. Sarah Chen insisted on guarding her personally. Cindy, trembling, tear-stained, and pale as bone dust, gave us the last breadcrumb we needed. She has backup identities, she confessed. 3, maybe more. Bank accounts overseas, one in Costa Rica, another in the Caymans. She told me once, "You don't survive this long without being ready to disappear." Brenda didn't just plan for contingencies. She prepared for collapse. Jake Morrison and I stayed in the field while the FBI mobilized. Our next break came from a familiar voice. "Marcus," Jake said, holding up his phone. "They found her." He turned the screen toward me. Surveillance footage from a cosmetic surgery clinic outside San Jose, Costa Rica. A woman, brunette, slimmer, face partially bandaged, was checking in at the front desk. The passport? Name, Elena Caro, but the posture, the eyes, it was her. She wasn't just fleeing. She was in the middle of a transformation. Burned fingertips, changed bone structure, fresh ID. By the time we landed in San Jose with extradition orders in hand, local authorities had already detained her in the surgical recovery wing. When I entered the room, she didn't flinch. She looked calm, as if she'd been expecting. "Me, Marcus," she said softly, voice rasping from sedation and swelling. "I warned you. Lake Ranch was the beginning of the end." "You buried 3 people in your backyard," I replied. "Do you know what we found in your basement?" She didn't answer. She just smiled, because she knew there was more we hadn't found. Her silence wasn't fear. It was confidence, the kind that said, "I'm not alone," and she wasn't. Over the next 72 hours, the FBI uncovered encrypted ledgers buried on hard drives from her home, offshore bank accounts under aliases, payments labeled only as RS Solutions, transfers between clients, and then a horrifying discovery. She'd been running a business, not murder for revenge, murder for hire. A service offered quietly to people who needed problems removed, unfaithful partners, business rivals, even political threats. Clients paid obscene fees for discreet, untraceable relationship solutions. Brenda handled the planning, the science, the cleanup, and when necessary, she'd refer other technicians across her network. It wasn't a serial killer. It was a cartel of assassins posing as community organizers. We traced payments across all 7 states, and then came the video files. Stored on a secure cloud account under a dummy name, they showed interviews with past clients, all masked, distorted, bragging about how Brenda had solved things. One woman talked about a controlling ex-husband whose car went missing after a routine check engine light came on. Another, a businessman, joked about his partner suddenly dropping dead of a stroke. With no history of health issues, Brenda's network was a spider web, and she'd spun it for over a decade, but what made it worse was how long she'd gotten away with it. Inside her Costa Rican hotel room, investigators found a handwritten list of 13 names, cities, states, and coded terms. Each one corresponded to a disappearance or sudden death that had long been ruled natural. We began matching identities. One of them was Jake's brother. Another was Sarah Chen's biological father. Every day brought new victims, new cases, new horrors. But then something happened. Something no one expected. Sarah found her name again, this time in a different context. Buried in a journal recovered from the storage unit, an entry dated 6 months earlier read, Sarah Chen, identified. As Richard's daughter, dangerous, possible exposure, must be removed, looking into accident scenarios. She'd been planning to kill Sarah. That revelation broke something inside her. I was just doing my job, Sarah whispered, staring down at the entry. I didn't even know who he was. And she still marked me for death. Because you were truth, I said, and she fears truth more than anything. Back in Lake Ranch, the community was unraveling. Residents were angry, lost, betrayed. The woman they trusted with their safety had turned their homes into surveillance zones and grave sites. The HOA dissolved overnight. The cameras? Ripped down, destroyed. For the first time in years, Lake Ranch could breathe again. But the healing came slowly, and the grief came in waves. Jake took his brother's belongings back home. Dorothy held a quiet memorial for Richard, where only the wind and 12 cats came to mourn with her. Sarah placed the adoption papers inside her father's coffin before burial, the first and last message he'd ever receive from the daughter he never got to raise. And then, just as we thought, the storm had ended. Cindy cracked. During a late-night debrief in protective custody, she confessed there was more. A second basement. Not under her house, she said. Under the funeral home. Morrison Funeral Home. She kept it off the books. She said it was her original lab. With that tip, local authorities stormed the now-defunct property. What they found turned our horror into numb disbelief. It wasn't just a room, it was a morgue. Preserved bodies, samples, notes, detailed autopsy-style recordings of each experiment. Brenda had documented every test of her poisons, every variation of timing, every result. This wasn't murder. It was science, clinical, academic. She was perfecting death. At trial, Brenda showed no remorse, not even curiosity. She sat silent while her journal entries were read aloud. She yawned when prosecutors described her garden of graves, but when asked why, she finally spoke. They were weaknesses, she said. Liabilities. People who thought they were important, but who had no value. I gave them purpose. In death, they fed beauty. The courtroom went silent. The families of the victims sobbed openly. Jake clenched his fists so tightly I thought his fingers might break. She was sentenced to life in a federal supermax prison, no chance of parole. But even then, I didn't feel peace, because Brenda's voice echoed in my mind. I'm not the only one. And she was right. We'd found 6 others in her network, 3 already dead. 2 missing. 1 still active. There are people out there, ordinary, unnoticed, who learned from her, who paid her, who used her, and who might be planning their next solution. Brenda Hawthorne didn't just kill. She taught others how. And every time I look out at my garden, the one where sunflowers now bloom tall and bright in defiance of her darkness, I remind myself of something. The real danger isn't when evil screams, It's when it smiles. What do you do when evil gets caught, but the wounds it left behind are still bleeding? The morning after Brenda's sentencing, Lake Ranch was quiet. Not peaceful, just still. Like the community had collectively exhaled, but didn't know how to inhale again. People walked their dogs slower. Neighbors looked at each other longer. There was no more surveillance, no more threats, no HOA fines. But the silence was heavy, like the echo of something they couldn't name. Trauma doesn't leave when the villain's gone. It lingers. And in Lake Ranch, it lingered in rose beds and driveways, in mailboxes that used to deliver threats disguised as notices. It lingered in kids asking why police came for their neighbor, in elderly couples wondering if they ever knew the people next door at all. And for me, it lingered every time I passed Brenda's house. They'd turned off the power. The roses had wilted. But the outline of what happened there still burned in my memory like an afterimage. 3 men buried beneath perfect flowers. 3 lives taken to maintain an illusion. And maybe more. Because we still hadn't found all the bodies. Jake Morrison and I kept working. Long after the press left, long after the headlines faded. Every day, new leads emerged, old names, forgotten victims, cold cases with fresh meaning. The FBI formed a task force dedicated solely to investigating what they now called the Rose Garden Network. It wasn't just a string of murders. It was a system, built by Brenda, embraced by others, and funded by people willing to pay for silence over justice. We traced shell corporations linked to 2 other funeral homes in Tennessee and Nevada. In both cases, suspicious deaths, sudden disappearances, burials with altered paperwork. The signs were there. We just hadn't connected them before, but now we had context, and context changes everything. Sarah Chen took a leave of absence after the trial. She needed time. Not just to grieve the father she never met, but to understand her own identity. For years, she'd worn the badge like armor. Now, it felt heavier than ever. I visited her one afternoon unannounced. She was sitting on the back porch of her small cottage, nursing a black coffee and staring out at nothing. "She almost killed me before I even knew who I was," she said without turning. "Isn't that something?" "She feared you," I said. "Because you stood for something she couldn't corrupt." She gave a dry laugh. "And still, I missed it. I lived next to a serial killer and didn't see it." "You did see it," I said. "Just not all at once. No one could have." She finally looked at me. Her eyes were tired, but not broken. "Promise me something," she said. "If you find anyone else like her, you don't wait. Don't let them build another garden." "I promise." But even as I said it, I knew the battle was far from over. Brenda had done more than kill. She'd engineered a blueprint. And someone, somewhere, had already read it. Cindy, still under protection, was rebuilding her life in pieces. Therapy 3 times a week. Speaking at support groups under a fake name. She'd finally started accepting that silence doesn't equal safety. That family can be poison in disguise. I met her one evening. She asked me to. She wanted to return something. It was a memory card. She'd hidden it in her purse before Brenda fled. Said she wasn't even sure what was on it. Just knew. It had to matter. When we played it back, we found footage Brenda had never meant to show. A video journal, fragmented clips, whispered thoughts in the dead of night. She talked about her process, about how fear was the most reliable currency, about how community rules were the perfect cover for quiet control. And then she said something I'll never forget. I never wanted power for the sake of power. I wanted to be safe. Safe from the people who laughed at me, left me, abandoned me. I just learned to kill the things that scared me. She paused, stared directly into the lens, her voice soft. Control is safety, and nothing grows in chaos. Then she smiled, except roses. It wasn't an excuse. It was a philosophy, twisted, clinical, but brutally honest. She wasn't just a killer. She was a true believer in her own myth, and that made her legacy even more dangerous. But in Lake Ranch, something began to bloom that wasn't planted by Brenda. Unity. With the HOA disbanded, the town formed a new residence board. Transparent, public, democratic. Meetings were open air now, held in parks, not behind glass. Neighbors showed up with lawn chairs and casseroles instead of complaints and clipboards. People started talking again, real conversations, about fears, about grief, about rebuilding. The old surveillance lights, gone, replaced with solar lanterns chosen by vote. My rose garden leveled, not paved, not buried, but transformed. We turned it into a memorial park, named after Richard Peaton, Davidson, and Councilman Brooks, the 3 victims we confirmed. But we left space on the plaque, because we knew there were more, and we wanted them to be remembered. 2. The first community event held there was a candlelight vigil. Over 200 residents came. Dorothy Kellerman lit the first flame. 12 cats followed her, and one of them, Sherlock, climbed onto the marble bench and sat like a sentinel as we read the names. Even the animals seemed to understand. This wasn't just about justice. It was about reclaiming peace, about rebuilding trust, and about making sure the soil we stood on, once soaked in secrets, now grew something honest. 1 year after Brenda's arrest, Lake Ranch was named one of the top 10 most resilient communities in America by a major newspaper. I laughed when I saw the headline. We weren't resilient because we were strong. We were resilient because we faced the truth and chose to stand anyway. That night, I sat on my porch. A breeze stirred the air. My sunflowers stood tall again. Even taller than last year, 12 feet, proud, glorious. Dorothy visited, carrying a tray of lemonade. Sarah joined us. Cindy, too. No uniforms, no badges, just people. Tired, scarred, but healing. We're still here, Dorothy said, sitting beside me. I nodded. And we're watching. We toasted with silence. But behind the quiet, I knew the truth. Somewhere, someone was reading Brenda's manual. Someone who believed in solutions. Someone who thought rules were meant for control. But if they ever came to Lake Ranch, they'd find something different now. Not fear, not silence, but a neighborhood that learned how to spot the monsters hiding, in suits and a chief who never stopped digging. You ever get the feeling that the story isn't finished, even when the villain's behind bars? We had our conviction. Brenda Hawthorne was locked in a federal supermax, facing multiple life sentences. Her voice would never echo through another HOA meeting. Her garden of graves had been unearthed, her empire had crumbled, but something didn't sit right. Not for me. Not for Jake. Not for Sarah. Because when someone like Brenda gets caught, it doesn't end the story. It widens it, and sometimes it reveals just how deep the roots really go. The first sign came quietly. A missing persons report from a town, 4 states away. Small place. Tight-knit. Just like Lake Ranch. A man in his 40s vanished after a disagreement with the HOA about a new fence he installed. Sound familiar? Jake flagged it. The HOA president there? A woman named Veronica Elks. Never. Married, former embalming technician. Moved to the town 3 years earlier. Quiet. Commanding. And when we looked closer, we saw it. The same patterns. The bylaws. The sudden resignations of board members. The surveillance. Same methods. Different name. Different face. It was happening. Again. Jake and I flew out under the radar. No press, no local briefing, just us. 2 men carrying the ghosts of Brenda's garden into someone else's nightmare. We interviewed 3 residents anonymously. All said the same thing. Fear. Rules changing without warning. People being fined, pushed, bullied. And when anyone resisted, they moved or disappeared. Sounded like coincidence, until one of the women, a librarian named Julie Mendez, leaned in and whispered, "She has roses too. Red ones. In the back. Always perfectly trimmed." I didn't flinch. I just asked one question. "Have you ever smelled formaldehyde in the yard?" Her eyes went wide. "How did you know?" Jake didn't wait. He had the cadaver dogs flown in. The next day, they hid in 3 places. We held our breath as excavation began, but instead of human remains, we found boxes, buried, sealed in waterproof containers. Inside, folders, contracts, digital drives, notes, all signed with the same 2 letters, RS Relationship Solutions Brenda. Hadn't just inspired copycats. She'd created a franchise. Her journal wasn't just a twisted diary. It was a guide, a business model, distributed, replicated, improved. We decrypted the drives. Each folder was a new location. Each file, a new operative, different women, different names, all trained, all mobile, all using the same system: surveillance, financial manipulation, false documentation, and, when needed, permanent removal. I wanted to believe Brenda had acted alone, but now I knew the truth. She was just the face of something much bigger, and it was still moving, still watching, still killing. We briefed the FBI. A new task force was formed within a week, this time with one goal: dismantle the network Brenda built. But even then, something kept tugging at me. Something Cindy had said months ago. She used to disappear for days. Said she was training someone. Said she had to pass it on before she got too old. I reviewed her prison communications. Dozens of messages had been flagged, all coded. All to different facilities, different lawyers, different clients. Most of the messages were deleted before they could be decoded, except one. It was a letter, a handwritten note intercepted before it could be mailed out from prison. It wasn't signed, but I knew the handwriting. Brenda. And what it said, it still gives me chills. I've planted seeds in every garden. My hands may be shackled, but my flowers are still blooming. You can dig up the roots, but you'll never stop the rain. We turned the note over. On the back was a list, coordinates, 12 sets, 12 locations, 12 more gardens. Jake and I sat in silence as the gravity of it settled in. She wasn't warning us. She was gloating. This wasn't over. Not even close. That night, I went back home. Stood on my porch with a glass of bourbon and watched my sunflowers sway gently in the wind. Dorothy's cats had returned to their nightly patrol. Sarah's porch light was on across the street. Cindy was asleep under protection 2 towns over. It felt quiet, but no longer safe. Because now I knew Brenda's system was built to outlive her, and unless we found every location, every student she trained, every town she infiltrated, it would keep growing. Somewhere out there, another HOA president was preparing her rules. Another hidden basement was being built. Another garden was waiting to be watered. The real question wasn't whether we could stop it. It was, how many were already too late? You never think the trap's meant for you until it's too late. After Brenda's note was intercepted, everything changed. We weren't chasing ghosts anymore. We were following a blueprint. A map left behind by a killer who never intended to be forgotten. 12 coordinates, 12 locations, 12 gardens. Jake and I divided them with the FBI team. Each site was discrete. Rural suburbs, manicured communities, old funeral homes turned storage facilities. At 6 of the 12, we found evidence. Not bodies, not blood, but infrastructure. Steel. Tables. Hidden rooms. Surveillance hubs disguised as maintenance closets. And in every location, one thing remained the same. Red roses. Always blooming. Always perfectly arranged. But it was the 7th location, a quiet town in northern Colorado, that finally brought the truth out of hiding. The place was called Maple Run. Another HOA. Another. Platinum blonde president with immaculate clothes and hollow eyes. Her name was Catherine Marks. 48. No children. Former mortuary technician from Indiana. And she had just won re-election for the 3rd year in a row, uncontested. The moment I saw her photo, my stomach sank. She didn't just resemble Brenda, she studied her. Jake and I flew out the same night. No advance notice, we didn't trust the locals anymore. Brenda had infiltrated power structures. If Catherine was part of her network, she'd learned how to keep secrets buried in plain sight. We arrived at sunrise. Maple Run looked peaceful. Too peaceful. Clean sidewalks, identical flower beds, a kind of Stepford perfection that felt more oppressive than beautiful. And then we saw the sign. No outside investigators beyond this point. Rule. 76 Jake stared at it. That's not a rule. That's a wall. I've seen this before, I muttered. Lake Ranch, almost word for word. We didn't wait for permission. We went to her house, white siding, rose bushes, black mailbox, just like Brenda's. But something felt off. Too quiet. No wind, no birds. I knocked. No answer. Then we heard it, a phone ringing, from inside. We broke the door. The house was cold. The air smelled like pine cleaner and cheap perfume. Every surface shined. Too clean. Living room? Empty. Kitchen? Spotless. Back door? Open. Jake stepped out first and froze. There in the middle of the yard was a single chair. On it, a laptop. Open. Recording. Red light blinking on the webcam, and beside it, a note, written in the same slanted cursive Brenda used. Marcus, you found the flower, but not the seed. Jake lunged for the laptop. Too late. The screen blinked. Static. Then a video started. It was Brenda, but not in prison. A pre-recorded message. Dated 2 weeks before her capture. She sat in a room we'd never seen. Clean, clinical, surrounded by red books. If you're watching this, she said calmly, then you're predictable. You've followed the coordinates. You're digging up what I planted. But here's the truth. You're not stopping anything. You're just playing catch-up. She smiled, slow and proud. I left behind more than tools. I left behind belief. Catherine isn't the only one. She's just the one I knew would get your attention. She leaned forward. Her voice dropped. The next one won't be as obvious. And then the laptop exploded. Small charge. No flames, but enough to fry the hard drive. Jake barely flinched. She planned this, he growled. She knew exactly how far we'd come. She's still 10 steps ahead. We didn't find Catherine Marks that day. She was already gone, disappeared 2 nights earlier, last seen at a train station headed west. Her credit cards? Burned. Her car? Parked neatly at the HOA office, engine cold. She left the roses blooming, and the town too scared to ask questions. But it was what we found in the HOA basement that changed everything. Behind the old breaker panel, we discovered another room. No bodies, no blood, just walls covered in photographs, not of victims, of us, me, Jake, Sarah, Cindy, Dorothy. Brenda had been watching our investigation unfold. In real time. She hadn't just left a trail. She'd built a theater, and we were the stars. We found copies of internal reports, photos of our team, printouts from FBI servers, surveillance footage from our homes. She had inside access, even from prison. She knew everything we were doing. I whispered. Every move. Jake looked pale. How? She's isolated. That's when we realized the truth. Brenda wasn't operating alone anymore. She never had been. She'd passed the torch. And someone else, maybe multiple people, were still running her playbook. Feeding her updates, building new networks while she watched from behind glass walls and security cameras. The cult of Brenda Hawthorne had outgrown its queen. We flew home in silence. At the precinct, Sarah was waiting, but something was wrong. She looked shaken. There's something you need to see, she said, pulling out an envelope. No return address. Inside, a single Polaroid of Sarah, standing in her kitchen, from outside her window, a timestamp, just 2 days ago. Jake stepped back. No way. That house is under surveillance, triple secured. Whoever took this, Sarah said, her voice shaking, walked right past our protection and left this in my mailbox. The back of the photo had a message. Richard never wanted her to. Wear a badge, let's fix that mistake. The handwriting Brenda's, but not from prison. A new variant, sloppier, less practiced, a copycat. Or something worse. Sarah stared at me. She's still coming for me. No, I said quietly. Someone is. And now, we didn't know who or how many. That night, I couldn't sleep. I watched the shadows. I watched the streets. I watched the roses in my own yard, wondering if they meant something more. And in the silence, I asked myself the question I never wanted to say aloud. What if this was never about stopping Brenda? What if Brenda was just the beginning? Do you ever wonder if the truth is a destination, or just a warning sign on the road to something worse? For months, I'd been chasing Brenda's shadow, uncovering her victims, dismantling her network, peeling back layers of horror that always led to something darker. But as I stood in my own living room, holding a photo someone had taken of Sarah inside her home, I realized something terrifying. We weren't chasing Brenda anymore. We were being hunted by what she left behind. I doubled the security at Sarah's house. Moved Cindy again. Called Jake at 3 a.m. and told him to drop everything. Something was coming. We could all feel it. And then the message arrived, delivered in an unmarked envelope sealed with wax. Inside, a flash drive. No markings. No context, just a single video file. I played it alone. The screen opened to a dimly lit room, a metal table, a single candle flickering beside a piece of paper, and then Brenda's voice. But this wasn't prison footage. It wasn't an interview. It wasn't even a message. It was live. "Hello, Marcus," she said softly. "Did you miss me?" My stomach turned. She was wearing prison clothes, but the background didn't match any facility I'd seen. The walls were wrong, the air too quiet. And the timestamp? It was real time. She was broadcasting from somewhere else, somewhere free. "You've been busy," she continued. "Digging, destroying, saving, so noble." She reached forward and adjusted the camera. "I wanted to give you something, a final gift." The camera shifted and revealed a man, gagged, blindfolded, tied to the chair. I knew that face. Officer Ramirez, one of our youngest patrol cops. Quiet, smart, kind. He lived 3 doors down from Sarah, had been assigned to her protection detail. "I've been watching," Brenda whispered. "You're not as fast as you think." My mouth went dry. She walked behind Ramirez, gently placed her hand on his shoulder, and leaned in close. I could make it look like a suicide, or an accident. But where's the poetry in that? She stepped to the table, picked up the paper, and held it to the flame. "Every garden needs pruning." Then the screen went black. I was already in motion. Calling Jake. Mobilizing SWAT. Every second felt like it was slipping through my fingers. We tracked the broadcast to a derelict funeral home, the same one she used to work in. Shut down for years. We should have searched it again. We should have known. When we breached the door, the smell hit first. Chemical, cold, too clean. Down in the basement, under flickering lights and dusty plastic curtains, we found Ramirez. Barely alive. Dehydrated. Bruised. But breathing. There was no sign of Brenda. Just another note pinned to the chair with a surgical blade. "You found this one in time. You won't always." And below that, "I never needed a garden. I became the soil." She was alive. She'd escaped. The woman we thought we'd buried in bars had slipped through the cracks like she always planned to. The woman we put on trial wasn't Brenda. Not really. Maybe a decoy. Maybe someone trained to impersonate her. Maybe a product of her system. But not her. Jake said it first. "She's not in a prison." "She never was," I replied. We reviewed the footage from her trial, examined fingerprints, reran DNA, everything had been falsified. Somehow she'd orchestrated a switch. The woman we convicted was an operative, someone who'd volunteered. Or been groomed, or paid. The real Brenda? Gone. And just like that, the storm started again. The FBI reopened the case. Sarah returned to active duty. Cindy changed her name. Dorothy kept her lights on all night, every night, with a shotgun beside. The door. And me? I stayed. Because the story wasn't finished. One morning, I woke up to find something on my porch. A sunflower. 12 feet tall, freshly planted. Too tall for the season, too perfect for chance. There was no note, no warning. Just the flower, defiant, golden, swaying in a breeze I couldn't feel. She was watching, maybe not nearby, maybe not even in the country, but somewhere. Brenda Hawthorne was alive, planning, smiling, and growing something new. People still ask me how we missed it, how we let it go this far, and I always give the same answer. We thought we were enforcing rules. She was rewriting them. And now? Now we live in a world where evil wears a name badge, mows its lawn on Sundays, and files permits on time. Where roses grow over bones, and the HOA president might just be planting more than flowers. But we also live in a world that fights back, where a sunflower can still bloom in poisoned soil, where victims become voices, where detectives don't stop chasing, even when the monster disappears, and where truth always, eventually, surfaces, even if you have to dig through hell to reach it. So if you ever feel like something's wrong in your neighborhood, don't ignore it. Look closer, ask the questions, check the roses, and if you find something that shouldn't be there, dig, because sometimes justice doesn't knock on your door. Sometimes you have to break it open yourself. And when you do, don't be afraid of what you find. Be afraid of what happens if you don't.